You know, when it comes to discussion as to what the worst comic book movie is, there's a lot of different things that are usually said between Marvel, the Marvels, Justice League, Zack Snyder's bastardized version, or sometimes a few other movies that some people seem to utterly forget. And the most forgettable of these movies just so happens to be The Flash, one that was so terrible that people kind of just forgot it existed. A movie where you somehow have one of the greatest storylines to adapt being Flashpoint and you messed it up so aggressively that it basically kills any remaining momentum the DCEU had up to that point. It was truly a sad state of affairs, a horrendous movie, and was just another tick box into the mainstream media's claim of superhero fatigue when ignoring the fact that it's really just bad movie fatigue. But the director of the movie has finally come out and done an interview, all in Spanish, so let's see if my 3 years of college Spanish will do me any good. I doubt it. So thankfully, it was all translated to English, in which he covers why he believes the movie failed so aggressively, from the incredibly lackluster budget to the fact that the movie just simply failed to land amongst the four quadrants, and he doesn't understand how it didn't resonate with the female audience. And then what is most peculiar is what was left out in the Variety version of the article when they covered it and translated it to English. How they completely left out the biggest point that Muschietti had made, which is that the main reason that he believed that the movie struggled was because of Ezra Miller's mental health issues. But that was completely omitted from the Variety version of the article and could only be found in the original interview that was once it was translated into English from Spanish. And just the best part about this is it goes right back into proving the point that these people are completely out of their minds and they have no idea what they're talking about and they don't know what the audience wants, which makes it even more concerning that they're giving Muschietti a second DC movie with James Gunn's Brave and the Bold. He ruined The Flash and now he can ruin Batman. And let me be very clear, The Flash is probably one of my favorite superheroes, sorry Isom. As I've always been a pretty big fan of the notion of speedsters, I love Barry Allen as a character. Wally West can go and get bent, I don't care, and I've always really appreciated the character as a whole. In my personal opinion, I think the Flash is the second best comic book character, just after Spider-Man. And then of course we've got the rest of the entire team, but in terms of his rogues and the way that he behaves, I truly believe the Flash is one of the best superheroes written. And while Ezra Miller was a terrible choice for Barry Allen, he'd be better as, at worst, Bart, but that would still be a terrible casting, partially because he's far too old and, well, he's not blonde. Give me my damn blonde Barry Allen already. It's also more baffling when you consider the fact that the CW already had the perfect casting for The Flash and Grant Gustin, so there was really no reason to change it, given the fact that you owned both companies, and Grant Gustin made an appearance throughout some of the other scenes. Ezra Miller blamed for Flash box office failure as Variety edits comments to trash the fans, written by M. Montanaro. Now, for some context, The Flash is probably one of the biggest box office flops of 2023, and the director Andy Muschietti had spoken candidly about why the $200 million DC tentpole failed to connect with audiences. Why the hell are you spending $200 million on a movie that realistically should only have one character? I don't know why they included nearly as many characters they brought in, at least as many tentpole characters they brought in. And now they justified making a movie that looked that bad, cost that much, because you can't even see where the money went. It's not relevant whatsoever in any of the animation or the CGI, since the CGI is just atrocious. And the cast, the only person there with any kind of gravitas is Michael Keaton, but he hasn't done anything worth value in 30 years. He had this interview with a Spanish paper called La Paurera de Coso. No idea if I said that right, I probably didn't. My professors would be so disappointed. Muschietti had pointed out a variety of factors, including Ezra Miller's off-screen controversies, the supposed superhero fatigue plaguing audiences, and the film's failure to appeal to the four demographic quadrants, being men and women and over and under 25. Now, of course, none of those really justify the reason why this movie failed. This movie was released in a time where there was still a little bit of faith in comic book movies, and given the fact it's The Flash, they definitely could have done it well if they had made the movie good. So there's nothing, I think Ezra Miller probably hurt it a little bit, but definitely not nearly as much as people are going to blame him for. Superhero fatigue is of course a myth, and it's instead bad movie fatigue, and if you just made a good movie, people would have gone and seen it. And then the reason it failed to appeal to the four demographic quadrants is because, well, for men, it's a bad movie, and for women, women don't like superheroes, as a general rule. And to be clear, I say general rule. If you know a woman, or are a woman who loves comic books, awesome! I'm not talking about you when I'm talking about the general rule. I am talking about the general population, the average, the generic. If you picked a random woman off the street, on average, she probably doesn't know who the Flash is. Now, of course, if you did want women to go and see it, there's one really simple solution, and it's what they did to make Aquaman popular. Remember, no one gives two shakes of rat's ass about Aquaman unless you're an actual comic book fan like I am. I actually like Stephen Curry, and as much as I love Jason Momoa, he isn't Aquaman, but that's beyond the point. Let's be entirely honest, the only reason women went there to see Aquaman was because of how unbelievably hot Jason Momoa is. They saw his pecs and they were immediately hooked in, hook, line, and sinker like the fish that Aquaman wants to save. So if you wanted to draw on those other two quadrants there, all you had to do was put a little smoke show in front of the screen for everybody to go and see, so there was some eye candy along with the speedster action. Now, of course, what is the most confusing thing about this is this little paragraph here. However, in a surprising twist, key parts of Muschietti's comments, specifically those referencing Miller's scandals, were omitted in a story published by Variety. So going back over to that actual Variety article, the one that first translated and moved over most of the interview, they completely ignored any of the comments about Ezra Miller. Now, the first thing I want to point out is, how much do they pay you over at Variety if you only have to write, 6 paragraphs? Are you getting paid for this? Like, I could do this in 15 minutes at most. I cannot believe that this is an official news article, and then for you to miss out the vast majority of the actual article, completely neglecting any mention of Ezra Miller. To be fair, there's one mention of it, and it is at the very bottom down in this paragraph. Outside of the box office woes, The Flash was plagued by lengthy delays and off-camera issues with the star Ezra Miller. That's it. That is their sole recognition of any of the problems that Muschietti offered as being the main issues with the movie. That is their sole recognition instead of actually covering what he said. Instead, it focuses solely on the fact that it failed to... First of all, they mentioned that it grossed $271 million, which, as they put it, by the end of its run, it is not a small figure by any means, but considering the budget size and projected marketing costs, the DC blockbuster needed to double that figure to get out of the red. For those of you who do not know, the general rule of thumb when it comes to how much a movie needs to make to break even is approximately double its production budget, because the theaters are taking about half, and then there's being things that are not being accounted for, whatever. So as a general rule, if a movie makes less than twice its production budget, it doesn't break even. And then they go on to include things about how it failed to hit all 4 quadrants, particularly that being the 2 women groups. Flash failed among all other reasons because it wasn't a movie that appealed to all 4 quadrants. It failed at that, Muschietti said on radio to the show. When you spend $200 million making a movie, Warner Bros. Wants to bring even your grandmother to the theaters. Muschietti went on to say that behind closed doors, he found people don't care about the Flash as much as other beloved DC icons like Batman or Superman. He noted this especially true in women under and over 25 demographic. As he directly said, I found in private conversation that a lot of people just don't care about the Flash as a character, Muschietti said. Particularly the 2 female quadrants, all of that is just the wind going against the film, I've learned. But no, that's not at all what's going on here. The problem is, women don't care about comic books as a general rule. Now, women care about some comics. They like Sandman, they like Death, they like some of those books, though probably not anymore after what's happened to Neil Gaiman. What Neil Gaiman did and was finally exposed to no one's surprise. But especially someone who isn't as mainstream as the other ones, being The Flash, of course women aren't going to generally be too appealed to him, especially when you cast a weasel of a man and not someone who's even remotely good looking to play a character who by all means should be a good looking character. The Flash is supposed to look like a jock, not like someone who got beaten up by said jocks. And on top of that, they completely ripped away any of the personality or intelligence that Barry Allen possessed. All of which was heavily praised and raised up by the CW show, which was incredibly popular at that time, and is still fairly popular even though the show was not very good after about season 3, with season 5 being the last redeemable season of the show. After they got rid of Cicada, the show was done. And Bloodspot was just such a bore. But the thing is, it doesn't matter whether or not the character has mass appeal. What matters, or should matter, is whether or not you can make a good movie. Because you can take characters that lack mass appeal and make them really popular, such as the Guardians of the Galaxy, Ant-Man, and plenty of other characters who were kind of neglected to begin with. And let's be entirely clear, the reason why Variety opted to leave out all the stuff about Ezra Miller is because that would turn this from a puff piece for the establishment to something that's actually critical of someone. Instead, this is mostly targeting the fans in this version of the article, instead of targeting real production issues. It is focusing on how the fans didn't want to go and see it, how they didn't know what the fans wanted. How it's the fans' fault that they didn't go and see it, and how it is the fans' fault that women didn't want to go and see it. This is blaming the fans. Whereas the real article is predominantly blaming Ezra Miller. And so let's read a bit of what was actually said in the article, in the interview, that actually shed light into what he believed the problems with the film were. And as I said, it was a complete translation from Spanish provided by Real Anarchy, so there might be some issues with it. It's the result of a mental health situation, Muschietti said. It turned out that way, it turned out. Let's say, he was dealing with a mental health situation, and well, when you make a movie, there are things you just can't control. One of them is when actors have a public relations crisis. He got into trouble, he was arrested in Hawaii, etc., etc. Let's not forget, he was arrested in Hawaii for literally throwing a chair at a minor. Muschietti went on to describe Miller as a talented actor who surprised him during production. I had, in general, a very good experience with him, the director said. He's a great actor, a great comedian, and I was surprised by him. But then, towards the end, I came across all of this. I'd say this happened months before release, just before the premiere, and well, it was a setback. But it wasn't that big of a setback because normies don't know about this stuff. Most of the things that are being said here are not things that a normie would care about or someone who doesn't already like comic book movies would necessarily notice. This is much more of an issue for people who are actually tuned into the media. And also, Ezra Miller has never been a particularly great actor. The few things I've seen him in, I wasn't too impressed by. Most importantly, the perks of being a wallflower, which is all in all a letdown of a movie to begin with, and Ezra Miller really didn't carry any weight in that film. And then, of course, here's the major concern, is the fact that Muschietti is coming back and currently directing Batman the Brave and the Bold for DC, assuming the film doesn't get canned. But however, the project's future is uncertain as it currently lacks a script and has shown little forward momentum. Under the leadership of James Gunn and Peter Safran, DC Studios is undergoing a major overhaul with many projects being reevaluated or cancelled outright. I really think this movie is probably one that should be canned for at least a little while, especially if Superman doesn't do well. And the current projections are that Superman is an underwhelming film at best. So it looks like this movie's not going to go. I truly believe if Superman fails, that's the end of DC Studios, and it might be the end of Marvel movies too for quite a while, aside from anything that is already being made. And I really don't want someone like Muschietti coming back to doing another movie, especially one for Batman of all characters, when he said he's going to bring Damian as the main Robin. Excuse me, Damian shouldn't be here for another 10 years. And what about the fact that somehow Muschietti completely left out every single member of the Flash's Rogues Gallery, and instead went for like 3 evil Flashes, which makes no sense for Flashpoint when you could have just brought Eobard Thawne in, someone that people would be dying to see. And why did we have to go with Flashpoint of all things? Is it just so you could justify putting a Supergirl in there? But even then, you stole Superman's role from Flashpoint, gave it to Supergirl, and gave her none of the weaknesses that Flashpoint Superman had. If you remember, Flashpoint Superman was decrepit and scrawny from being depraved from the outside world for the entirety of his time on Earth. But this Supergirl, no, she's just a nicely shaped Latina. I know James Gunn desperately wants to preserve what was there before, but let's be honest, there's nothing there worth preserving. You should scrap it all, get a whole new set of directors, find some new actors, and restart from scratch. That means you gotta leave your legacy babies behind as well. No The Suicide Squad, and no Peacemaker Season 2, and for God's sake, no Creature Commandos. But that's pretty much all I've got for this video. So if you're just here for the video, I will see you guys on the next one. Now, if you're someone who's actually watching my channel invested, I do want to quickly say that I apologize for my excessively long absences. And that's simply because I was home for winter break and I had to deal with some stuff there. But I'm back in my dorm, obviously. I've got some new posters, and I'm looking forward to doing regular content once again. Now, if you're interested in this topic that was covered, I actually covered this on the podcast with my friends over at the channel Master Swag King. I know, cringe name, but I covered it with my friends, and we spent a pretty good chunk of time discussing that on that live stream. And if you really want to have some fun, we spent over an hour on that stream arguing about whether or not Avengers Endgame was a good movie. My stance is no, it's a terrible movie, though it was a fitting ending for the Infinity Saga. If you guys like my content and want to check that out, I highly recommend it because it was an incredibly fun podcast, and I do that every week at Monday at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But that's really all I've got, so I will see you guys on the next one.